Mazel tov, my daughter just graduated with a master's degree in psychology from arguably the best university in Israel for her particular field. Nearly all the other students there were from very secular backgrounds in Tel Aviv and Hod Sharon, and she was one of less than a handful of Orthodox women there. When someone asked her to speak about her background, she said, "I'm married to an Avrech, a Torah scholar, who immerses himself in Torah night and day, and I have no interest in changing who I am." She said, "I'm different to you. I respect you, and I respect what you have to teach me here, but I have no interest in becoming like you. And if I do become like you, then we'll both have lost. Because I treasure my religious values and my way of life, and you need skilled Orthodox women professionals in this particular field." She told me that she would never even dreamt of doing this master's in such an environment had it not been for her upbringing. Our house, thank God, has always seen a procession of Shabbos guests of all shapes, sizes, and persuasions, the weird and the wonderful. You can bring up your children in one of two ways. One alternative is to try and insulate them totally, to cut yourself off to the maximum degree from any negative lures of the secular world. But even this might not be hermetic enough. Alternatively, you can face the challenges of the modern world and give your children a pride and a love of Torah Judaism, and hope and pray very hard that you'll inoculate them against the cesspools of society. There's no guarantee in either choice. Rabbi 𤅅𐤂𐤊 comments on this week's Torah portion that Yaakov learned two Torahs, so to speak. One was the teachings of his father Yitzhak, which he learned in the first 63 years of his life. This was a Torah where father and son learned together in an atmosphere hermetically sealed from the corruption of Canaan. However, to survive the spiritually toxic environment of Charan in the company of Laban, and his cohorts, Jacob needed the Torah of Shem and Ever. For Shem had lived together with the generation of the flood, and Ever had lived together with those who built the Tower of Babel. Yaakov's sojourn of 14 years in the yeshiva of Shem and Ever inured him to the spiritual dangers of Haran. To be a Jewish parent in today's world is an unprecedented challenge. To succeed, we also need those two aspects of Torah. We need the unshakable hermetic commitment and faith in the Torah that was given to us at Sinai. We need to study it with all our strength and fulfill all its mitzvahs, its commandments, down to their finest details, and not give way. And we also need the Torah of love, of tolerance, and of compassion. We need to be there for our children with unconditional love, however difficult life may be for them. We must inspire, and we must be inspired. And with these two Torahs, and with a lot of prayer and the help of Hashem, we'll protect our nearest and dearest from the worst that the world has to offer. The most certain thing in life is also the most frightening. Nothing else is as sure as death, and we fear death as nothing else. In truth, for a Jew who believes in a future world where all the mitzvot that we do will breathe life back into us, dying is like walking into a room and taking off your body like a coat. I once wrote a short story about this idea. It goes like this. Neshama was a water being. Neshama breathed in the life-giving fluid in which she floated. She turned on her side, and her life support cable gently undulated like a sea snake in the dark liquid in which she lived. She had spent her days here in deep communication with her spirit guide who had taught her all the secrets of the universe, but now she was alone. Now she knew that her life was coming to an end. Like all other water beings, she would be drawn down the tunnel of death like a vortex, vanishing into infinity. Like a puny raft circling on the edge of a giant whirlpool, she felt herself being drawn down inexorably. Panic rose in her throat. I don't want to die. I want to live forever. Her ears filled with the most sublime music, a single chord of all the water voices singing one wordless chord, undulating through every known scale. The sound grew and grew. Down and down she went, down and down the tunnel, and then it was over. It wasn't a particularly busy night in the delivery rooms at Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. A new life had just entered the world, crying and gasping for breath. The nurse cleaned the liquid from the baby's mouth, wrapped her in swaddling, and placed her in her mother's arms. The mother looked down at the baby and said, "You're so beautiful, Neshama." A Jew prays 3 times a day. The words of the 3 prayers are almost identical. It sounds like being a bit of a robot, doesn't it? Is my heart supposed to open and close on demand at the same times, 3 times a day with the same words? What if I just don't feel like praying? In Hebrew, there are several words for prayer. There's a kind of prayer called siach. Siach means literally conversation. Sometimes we speak to God as though we would to a close friend, and we know that He's listening, paying attention to our every word like a good friend. There's another kind of prayer called techina. Techina means to beseech, to implore. When we're in trouble, when someone's very ill, we beseech, we implore. The 3 daily prayers are called tefillah, and the act of praying these prayers is called lehitpalel. Now, lehitpalel is a reflexive verb. So literally, lehitpalel means to pray to yourself. Now, clearly, this cannot be its true meaning. The root of the word hitpalel is pilel, which means to judge. To understand the connection between praying and judging, we have to understand the deeper function of a dayan, a Torah judge. A dayan takes conflicting evidence, disunion, and injects into this confusion divine truth as revealed in the Torah. This truth penetrates to the heart of the opposing views and creates a unity on a higher level. Similarly, when we pray, when we are mitpalel, we inject into the turmoil of our unquiet soul the divine truth which pierces through all the artifice, all the conflict and confusion inside us. The prayer that we call tefillah is reflexive because it brings us face to face with the great harmony at the core of our existence. In other words, tefillah is not an outflow of emotion, it's an influx of divine energy, a prescription for the soul formulated by the greatest physicians of the soul, Chazal, the Jewish spiritual masters. And thus, like any medication, it has to be taken at prescribed times and with exact, repeatable doses, and very often, just as with medicine, when we desire it the least, we need it the most.
Shabbat Shalom. In this week's Parshah, Parshat Vayetze, we read about the story of Jacob, how he leaves his home and travels towards Haran, the strange vision of the ladder. But I want to focus on what happens when he arrives at Charan. He arrives early in the morning, and he notices that there are a bunch of shepherds who are all sitting around, lazing around with their sheep. Jacob is perturbed. These are obviously men who are employed to care for the sheep, and he goes up to them and says, "Gentlemen, what's going on? Why aren't you working?" To which they respond and say, "We need to give our sheep water. However, there's this massive rock over the well and requires each and every one of the shepherds to gather together to shift the rock so we can give our sheep the water, and then we can go out and they can go and graze. So until everyone arrives, I'm sorry, we have to wait." And while Jacob is listening to this and their excuse, Rachel arrives with her flock of sheep. And Jacob is so taken by her that he walks up to the rock, shifts the rock out the way, and gives the sheep the water. And our rabbis comment and say, what was the reason? It was a heavy rock. And they respond by saying that the love of Jacob for Rachel gave him the power, the superhuman power, to move the rock. I would like to suggest an alternate answer, and that is that the rock was never that heavy, and the shepherds were just offering an excuse. And here is the important lesson. In life, there's always going to be excuses. There's always going to be that massive rock that's going to prevent you from doing what you have to do. I'm sorry, I would love to help, but I've got no time. I'm sorry, I would love to, but my schedule is too heavy. But if you analyze it, you'll probably find that you do have time. It's just a case of being motivated and wanting to do something. Our rabbis describe that the rock and the water in this scenario symbolize the rock of the water is the symbol of Torah. Mayim Chayim is described as the Torah. The rock is the impediment, the blockage, the excuse that prevents us from achieving our learning and our growth and of our spiritual growth. And every one of us has that rock that is sitting on top of the well. The excuses are plenty. But if we actually do and walk a little bit closer and discover what exactly is the rock, we may just find that it's just made out of paper mache. And all it is a rock of excuse. May we be like Jacob and merit the ability to shift those rocks to allow us to engage with our spirituality, our community, ourselves, and drink the living waters. Shabbat Shalom. Hi, this is Rabbi Leah, and if you've enjoyed the content of the sermons and the ideas that have been expressed in the YouTube video, please hit that subscription button and notification bell and share the videos with friends. We'd love to grow the channel and love to engage with you. Please share your comments in the section below. I'd love to hear from you. Have an amazing day.
Nearing his passing, Rabbi Zusha of Annapolis said, "In the next world, I won't be asked why you were not Moses. Rather, they will ask why you were not Zusha." This well-known anecdote teaches us that imitation is not good. Even imitation of a perfect tzaddik like Moshe. A person must ask himself, is his actions reflect his special personality and his unique role in the world? That's it. We must know that the expectations from one person to the next are completely different. And with this in mind, the right question is not what are the person's achievements, but how do they fulfill the unique role that was assigned to them in their life. But the truth is that there's an even deeper message here, because this anecdote does not only concern the overarching reason why we come into this world, but also to the smaller matters in our everyday life that seem to be trivial. Even in these parts, we have to give our maximum. As we see in this week's Parshah, Parshat Vayetze, Yaakov is talking to his wives, and he sums up his work as a shepherd of Laban's sheep with the following words: "And you know that I worked for your father with all my might, b'chol kochi." Now, on the face of it, this doesn't make sense. The job of being a shepherd doesn't justify such an effort. Being a shepherd is a sedentary occupation with very few physical demands. You go out in the morning with a total amount of animals and you bring the same number back at night. Surely it couldn't have demanded Yaakov's absolute attention and all his might. Rather, what Yaakov meant when he said, "I worked with all my might," is that he saw his job as a shepherd as the most important thing currently in his life. This was his focus and personal motivation. Just as when he was in yeshiva, he learned with unwavering concentration. When he was in the synagogue, he prayed with every fiber of his being. So too now that he had the job of watching the sheep, this was the single most important part of his life, and he did it with all his might. Because at this stage of his life, this was his way of serving Hashem. He realized that he had been sent from Israel to Haran to build his family and fortune. And if being a shepherd is the channel to achieve this, so be it. This will become his focus, and this is his goal. So the message for us is clear. Whatever we're doing now, we should do it as if we'll be doing it for the rest of our lives. There's no such thing as a dead-end job or just marking time in our career. Obviously, we don't have to stay where we are forever. But now that we're doing something, we should dedicate ourselves to what we are doing as if this is our sole focus and purpose. Who can know what they're doing at this moment, this hour, this week, this month, this year, or decade isn't the most important thing they might ever do. And the only way to dedicate ourselves to our future is by making our present count. This is why we say in the daily Shema that we should love Hashem with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our might. B'chol mo'odecha. Sages explain that with all your might refers to whatever measure that has been measured to us. And this means that we should be imbued with the recognition that everything we do should be done with all our might, because anything we do can be done for the sake of heaven. We must realize that any task we have is our purpose. It's unique to us, and it's meant to help us reveal Hashem more in this world. So let's remember, in the next world, they won't ask us
I'm
why we were
curious,
not like
what's
Moses.
with the Chanel number
They'll ask,
5 barrel?
why weren't you yourself, even in the small and trivial things? Shabbat Shalom.
Sorry, I think I was distracted by that. Let's see, what am I going to put on?
Who out of the two sisters in our Parsha holds the best recipe for happiness, Leah or Rachel? They are usually compared to each other. So in the famous Divine Comedy written by the Italian poet in the Middle Ages, Dante Alighieri, when he almost gets to the terrestrial heaven, he has a dream. And in his dream, he sees Leah and Rachel, when Rachel represents the contemplative way of life, the way of seeing. She views herself in the mirror, watching her own reflection, while Leah represents doing, the active way of life. She gathers flowers and weaves them into the beautiful garland. In Convivio, his earlier philosophical work, Dante followed Aristotle, and he explains that contemplative way of life gives you more happiness. It's the better happiness than the way of the active way of life, the way of doing, that also can bring you to the happiness, but not to such a bliss. So that's this conception. Also, you can see in the famous statue by Michelangelo in Rome. If once you get to Rome after the Corona time, you can see Rachel and Leah represented in his statue in the same mode. In our sages view the way of seeing through the books. Our mirror that Rachel was looking at and seeing her own reflection is actually Torah. That's how we contemplate life. And the question, what's better, action or study, was asked in Talmud, especially in Kiddushin, while there was a discussion. Rabbi Tarfon said that action is greater, while Rabbi Akiva said that study is greater. All the rest of the rabbis agreed that with Rabbi Akiva, that study is greater because it leads to action. So you don't really have to choose between the two, but you choose the one that leads to the other. As for me, Rachel actually lives a very active life, actually a life of a fighter. And for me, she represents becoming a mother of all Jews, from a very young, beautiful, and kind of clueless girl that can't have kids. She fights for whatever she wants to become. And she's so different from Leah, who actually lives the life of being whoever she is, flowing with the wind, being grateful to God for whatever she has in life, thus naming her son Yehuda. And the greatness of our ancestors, that we have both of them, Rachel and Leah, whether they represent the active way of life or the contemplative way of life, the way of becoming or the way of being, both of them are part of our imahot. And that's the greatness of our ancestors. Shavua Tov from Shechter.
Shalom Aleichem Internet. I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Today is the 9th of 𝐤𝐤𝐃, the 23rd of November. My name is Sender Gajzinski, and here is this week's Torah Bites. This week's Torah portion is Parshat Vayetze. Vayetze opens up with Yaakov, the third of our forefathers, fleeing the wrath of his brother Esav after Yaakov had come in and taken the blessings that his father had originally meant for Esau. This led Esau to fly into a real rage and seek revenge on Yaakov. Yaakov therefore runs from Beersheba and is heading to Haran, the hometown of his uncle, his mother's brother, Laban. On his way, Yaakov suddenly finds that nightfall has set and he is stuck in the middle of the wilderness. And so it says, "Vayikach me'avnei hamakom vayasem mira'ashotav," that he has taken from the stones of the area and he had placed them around his head. Rashi explains he did so because he was afraid of the wild animals and wanted to protect himself by surrounding himself with a fence-like structure. The obvious question that one could ask over here is, what good would it do Yaakov to just protect his head by placing stones around it and leave the rest of his body exposed to the wiles of the wild animals? The Rebbe explains what Yaakov was really doing here and also what the lesson is for each and every one of us. Of all our forefathers, Yaakov is the one that we choose to name ourselves after. Yaakov's second name was Yisrael, and we call ourselves Bnei Yisrael. The reason is because Yaakov's modus operandi specifically is the one we draw the most lessons from as to how we live our lives as spiritual creatures in this physical world. This is alluded to in Yaakov's name. Yaakov was Yud-Akev, which is the concept that he has a soul that ascends to the highest levels. The Yud, the letter in a certain sense, it represents God. And his mission and purpose is to take this Yud and to connect it and to bring it and to imbue it into the Akev, which is the heel, the lowest element within this world. That is the unique structure of us. We are a godly soul in a very physical and lowly body. Yaakov began his life's mission really at this moment, once he left Beersheba, the cocoon of the home he grew up in, and is now heading out there into the world, in fact, to a place known as Charon af shel makom, the place of God's anger, and also to Laban, who was known to be if not the greatest trickster of all time, right up there in the top 10. On his way, Yaakov is preparing himself mentally, physically, spiritually for this new mission in life. And he does so by taking stones and surrounding his head. You see, Yaakov understands that his job is not to be separate from the world and not to close off any connection between him and the world around him. He has to engage the world. He has to be involved in the world. As we find ourselves also, if one thinks about really the mitzvot that God gives us, 90% of them are engaging some sort of physical element. The ultimate Jewish experience is not a lofty, spiritual, separate, sublime experience, but rather a very physical and materialistic and engaging experience. We light wax candles on Shabbat. We eat challah. We wrap leather on our arms for tefillin. We engage this world for the purpose of not that the world affecting us, but the opposite, that we should go out and affect the world, that we drive the world towards its perfection and towards its elevation. And so we cannot be cut off or removed from the world, or else we would not be able to have an effect on it. We would, in other words, be angels. At the same time, however, we have to understand that the world is full of elements that are negative and could have an effect on us and drag us down. We have to understand that while we are within the world, we are actually above it as well. And that we do by protecting our head, by protecting our focus and our attention, and saving that for higher purposes, for higher focus and higher attention. Yaakov, on his way to Haran, understands that he's going to be dealing with the wilderness. And he has the ability to not allow the wilderness to affect him, but for him to affect the wilderness. And so his arms, his legs, his heart even are engaged and open to the world. But his head, his calling, his purpose, his vision is higher and removed and separate. We find that this comes into practice in the way we prioritize our life. While 6 days a week we work, there is a seventh-day Shabbat, which acts as a reality check, a moment to refocus. What is it that we are here for? We are not just living and engaging the world, but we're living and engaging the world towards a purpose. And if our mind, at least, is not still aware and cognizant of that purpose, then at that point, we are sunk. And so we take the lesson from Yaakov, the Bechir Shabbat, the choicest of our forefathers. And we begin our journey in engaging the world, understanding that while we are being within, we are staying above. I wish everybody much success in their endeavors and engaging the world and driving the world towards perfection, and also success in keeping the focus and the priorities in the holy and sublime place that they are meant to be. Good Shabbos, and looking forward to seeing you next week for the next installment of Torah Bite. Yaakov is Yud. Yaakov is Yud Akev.
Hi, I'm David Taub, and welcome to the Parsha Rabbit Hole, where I find something weird in the weekly Torah portion and follow it all the way down until it gets even weirder. This week, when I was at the very beginning of my rabbit hole research, I asked my brother, Rabbi Shais Taub, if he had any ideas of where to start. And immediately he had a very specific suggestion of where I should start, and this my brother, Rabbi Shais Taub, if he had any ideas of where to start. And immediately he had a very specific suggestion. It gets even weirder. This week, when I was at the very beginning of my rabbit hole research, I asked my brother, Rabbi Shais Taub, if he had any ideas of where to start. And immediately he had a very specific suggestion of where I should start, and this is what he said.
Okay, I know how this Parsha rabbit hole works, okay? I watched every episode. Parshas Vayetze, and you need something that's going to be weird. I have a good sense for weird.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that was his brother.
I have an appreciation for the weird. Look into the dudoyim. Those are the mandrakes, the flowers that little Ruvain as a child picks and he gives to his mother, and then she trades with her sister. Look into the flowers, follow the flowers. You're going to find some weird stuff. I'm pretty sure of it.
It's a drug.
Okay, follow the flowers, the mandrakes. Now, if any of you out there are familiar with the Harry Potter books or movies, you'll immediately recognize the word mandrakes because that's something that comes up a few times in those books, and it's mentioned as having magical properties.
Today, we're going to repot mandrakes.
And the reason why mandrakes are used that way in those books in the first place is because there's a lot of lore surrounding mandrakes as having magical properties. I asked my brother if he was aware of any of this stuff, and he said he wasn't. He just has a really good radar for weird. And he was right. The mandrakes give us a lot to go on. So let's follow those flowers and jump right down into the rabbit hole. This week's Torah portion, Parshat Vayetze, is very full. There's a lot going on. Most of Yaakov or Jacob's sons, who are eventually the founders of the 12 tribes of Israel, are born during this week's Torah portion, and there's a whole space race going on between Leah and Rachel to have more babies. Eventually, towards the halfway point in this whole story of all these kids being born, we get the story of the flowers. And this is what it says in the Parsha. V'yelech Reuven b'mei katzir chitim v'yimtza dudayim b'sada v'yavei oisam el Leah imai v'tomer Rachel el Leah tanin na li medudai b'nech. Once at the time of the wheat harvest, Reuven came upon some dudayim in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's dudayim. Now, if you'll notice, I didn't translate dudayim as mandrakes, because first we have to answer the question, how do we even know that we're talking about mandrakes? A bunch of translations translate it that way, but how do we know that that's what we're talking about? And how do we know it's the same mandrakes as the ones that have the lore connected to it? Maybe the English translations are using the word mandrakes, but it's not connected to the magical mandrakes, and it's not even worth exploring, which would mean we don't even really have a rabbit hole. According to Rashi, they're not mandrakes at all. Rashi says that the flowers were jasmine flowers, and different commentaries say different things. In the Gemara, there's a discussion about what the dudayim were, and one of the opinions there says that the dudayim were yavruchim. This is also how Unkelos translates dudayim in the verse into Aramaic. Okay, so then what are yavruchim? According to Rashi, he won't tell us. He says he doesn't know what they are. The key to figuring out what the yavruchim are is Arabic. A bunch of different commentaries use Arabic to get the meaning of the word. They say that this word yavruach in Aramaic comes from an Arabic word. Now, I don't know Arabic at all, but I can use Google Translate, so I looked it up, and this is what I found.
Mandrika.
That's not yavruach, and it just sounds like mandrake. But it sounds too much like the word mandrake. Seems like that's probably the modern way to say mandrake in Arabic, and it's borrowing from the Greek root. Now, as I said, I don't know anything about the language. If there's anybody out there who does know Arabic and can help us out, please let us know what's going on in the comments. But I did some digging to try and find the word yavruach in Arabic, meaning mandrake, and eventually I found this.
Yavruach.
There we go. Now we have the connection, and we know that at least according to some opinions, the dudayim in the Parsha are mandrakes. And that's where the fun starts. We'll start with Ibn Ezra, who translates dudayim as yavruchim, which we established as mandrakes. He says that these dudayim, these yavruchim, had a very good smell, and then he goes on to explain that yavruchim are shaped like human beings. Now this is where we start to see the weird magical mandrake stuff. And this idea of mandrakes having a human form shows up in all sorts of smell, and then he goes on to explain that Yavruchin are shaped like human beings. Now, this is where we start to see the weird magical mandrake stuff. And this idea of mandrakes having a human form shows up in all sorts of non-Jewish mythology and lore. When I dug around, I found an endless supply of medieval paintings and drawings of mandrake roots depicted as weird little dudes growing in the ground. Now, once I made this connection to the mandrake root being shaped like a human being and maybe being some sort of plant man, the first thing that came to my mind is a creature that's mentioned in Gemara and Midrash and in various different commentaries called Adne Hasada, and it's also sometimes called the Yedua. This is a humanoid monster creature that is attached to the ground by its umbilical cord. It can't leave the radius of its umbilical cord thingy that's attached to the ground, and it just grazes in a circle, and if anybody gets close to it, they get eaten. I will definitely do a video about this in the future.
Back to the future.
But it doesn't seem like this has anything to do with mandrakes. I looked around and I tried to find a connection, and it seems to me that they are two completely different things. So we'll get to the Adne Hasada sometime in the future. But for now, we're focusing on the mandrakes. And it seems to me, from what I could find, that while the mandrakes are described in many places in Jewish sources as having human form, they're not described as being animated in any way. They're not little dudes that grow in the ground. It's a plant that is shaped like a person. But that doesn't mean that the magic ends there. There's still a lot of cool stuff about mandrakes. At the end of Ibn Ezra's commentary, where he's talking about the Dudaim as mandrakes, he mentions that they supposedly have an ability to increase fertility, which would make sense in this story because of the whole baby space race that I was talking about. But it doesn't make sense to Ibn Ezra that mandrakes would have that property because he said their nature is cold. This is a humorism thing. Again, another rabbit hole. I'm not going to get into it now. But suffice it to say that Ibn Ezra mentions the idea of them being able to help with fertility, but says that he doesn't understand why that would be the case. Now, I should mention here that the word for these flowers in Hebrew, Dudaim, is actually related to the word for love or beloved, just like my name, David. My new favorite Chumash, the Book of Genesis by Open Book Press, which I mentioned before, but I'm shamelessly mentioning it again, actually translates it as love herbs, which I think is absolutely brilliant. So many commentaries talk about this plant as having the ability to increase fertility. Sforno mentions this idea, but says it a little bit differently. He says the Yavruchin, the mandrakes, are actually an aphrodisiac, that they can actually make two people be more attracted to each other. And he adds that Reuven, who apparently, according to the math, could only have been at maximum 5 years old at the time, was very righteous and smart for figuring this out and trying to help. Okay, so far we've got the mandrakes are kind of shaped like people, and they might have the ability to help people have children or to make people be more attracted to each other. Ramban, or Nachmanides, kind of puts this all together and also answers some questions. He points out that Rachel, who was the one who ended up with the mandrakes, was able to become pregnant because her prayers were answered by Hashem, and not because of the medicinal properties of a plant. And he goes even further and says that if this plant has those properties, it's the root that would have those properties.
Who here can tell me the properties of the mandrake root?
And Reuven didn't pick the plant because of the root and its medicinal properties. He picked the plant for its flowers, which were pretty and smelled nice. And he adds that he's never seen anything in any medical books about mandrakes helping with fertility. So according to Ramban, he doesn't even think that the plant has these effects, and even if they did, that's not what's relevant to the story at all, which would kind of end the rabbit hole here. Well, but there's still a lot more.
It's not necessarily, because it might not just be the flowers, it could also be the fruits.
Satisfied that I had found enough weird mandrake stuff on the commentaries on the Parsha, I expanded my search radius to see if I could find Yavruchin in other parts of Torah, which led me to a piece from Talmud Yerushalmi. There it's talking about how you're not allowed to use verses from Torah as incantations to heal wounds or cure illnesses. And then it mentions specifically that you can't say a verse over Yavrucha. So what's Yavrucha? According to Korban Ha'eda, which is a commentary on Talmud Yerushalmi, Yavrucha is the name of a specific type of illness. But then he offers an alternative explanation and says that Yavrucha means Yavruchin. That's our mandrakes. And he says that Yavruchin have this property, that anybody who uproots them, it's dangerous for them. And so the Talmud Yerushalmi is telling us that you can't use psukim or verses from the Torah to help make it safe for somebody to uproot mandrakes so that they won't get hurt. Now, this idea that it's dangerous to uproot mandrakes is something that I saw when I did my digging around the internet, but I didn't want to talk about it until I could find it in Torah. It mentions in a bunch of non-Jewish places that somebody who uproots mandrakes dies.
It's also quite dangerous. The mandrake's cry is fatal to anyone who hears it.
And therefore, the method to uproot mandrakes is that you have to tie the root to an animal and let the animal do it, and then the animal dies. So I dug around to see if I could find that idea in Jewish sources, and I did. But in order to understand that, we have to back up a little bit. This whole story in the Parsha about Reuven picking flowers and then giving them to his mother Leah, and then Leah trades the flowers to Rachel so that Leah can be with Yaakov that night. That's actually the origin story of Leah's next child, Yisachar. At the end of Sefer Bereshis, the book of Genesis, when Yaakov is giving blessings to all of his children, he says Yisachar chamor gorim, which is translated as Yisachar is a strong-boned donkey. But the Gemara plays with that verse and interprets it midrashically to mean Yisachar chamor gorim, Yisachar was caused by a donkey.
My fault.
According to Rashi, Yaakov was riding on his donkey, and Hashem caused the donkey to veer towards Leah's tent, which is how Hashem intervened in this whole episode so that Yisachar would be born, and thus Yisachar was caused by a donkey. But there's a midrash that has a different version of how Yisachar was caused by a donkey, and it involves mandrakes. The commentary Tzror Hamor brings this midrash from Midrash HaGalui, which interestingly is a compilation of midrashim that only appears in the form of a few snippets that are brought in different places in this one commentary. And this is what he says in our Parsha. He says, according to this midrash, Reuven went out to graze his father's donkey. He took the donkey for a walk, and then when he was done, he tied the donkey to the root of this plant, the Dudaim, which he didn't think anything of, and then he went on his way. But when he came back, he found that the donkey was dead, and the other end of the rope was attached to these uprooted mandrakes. Because, as we know, anybody who uproots a mandrake dies, and that's what happened to the donkey. Reuven thought these flowers were pretty and smelled nice, and so he gave them to his mother, and that's how Yisachar was caused by a donkey. and also mandrakes. Okay, so far what we found out about mandrakes is that they're shaped like human beings, even though they're not animated. They're not like little mandrake dudes, but they're shaped like people. And they might be able to increase fertility or attraction. And we found a couple of sources that anybody who uproots them dies. So that's pretty cool. And when I started looking into this idea, it became very clear that the rabbit hole was leading me to magic potions and herbology. But before I got into any of that, I felt like it was important to acknowledge that the Gemara refers to Torah as a magic potion. But I didn't want to just throw it in as an aside. Torah can't just be an aside. I wanted it to lead to our exploration of potions. So I decided to go to the person who sent us down this path to begin with. The person who told us to follow the flowers, my brother, Rabbi Sheistaub. So I'll hand it over to him to explain this idea to us and get us to the next part of our rabbit hole.
Okay, thank you, David. I'm going to try to help out over here. I think I understand what's happening. I suggested to you to check out the mandrakes and see if you'll find some weird stuff, and it seems that you did. And you are exploring the idea now of all types of magical potions, which is definitely rabbit hole worthy. And you'd like to first acknowledge the idea that Torah itself is referred to as a Sam Chaim, medicinal healing herb, or maybe, in fact, you might call it the quintessential or archetypical herb, or even the original herb. Although I think original herb is the name of a flavor of Ricola cough drop, but it is on the CRC recommended list, so it's got that going for it. Which is nice. Let's talk about Torah as an herb. Let's go to the Talmud, Yuma 72b. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, what is the meaning of the verse? This is the Torah that Moshe placed or put. Some, sin, mem, means he put or he placed. This is a Torah that Moses placed. So the Gemara tells us, Zacha, if a person merits, Nasis le sam chayim. Torah is a sam. It's a little pun. Some, he put, Moshe put, is sin, mem. Samach, mem is herb, but a sin and a samach are interchangeable because phonetically they're the same and they come from the same compartment of speech, from the 𝐤�𐤉𤐃 sapeh. At any rate, so if a person is Zayche, if he merits, then Nasis le sam chayim. Torah will become an elixir of life, a life-giving medicinal herb. Leizacha, but if he doesn't merit, Nasis le sam misa. The same Torah will become for him a deadly herb, which I guess you would call a poison. So how is it possible that one and the same thing could be both a medicine and a poison? So Chassidus explains, and particularly in the Kuntres Eitz Chaim from the Rebbe Rashab, that the idea of being Zoiche, of meriting, is also related to the idea of Zichuch, of refinement. That a person who is refined, that means humble, selfless, spiritually conscious, then when he learns Torah, it will benefit him spiritually. It will bring him closer to Hashem. But if a person learns Torah with ego, if he learns it just to be smarter than everybody else, then it could actually, God forbid, spiritually damage him. And by the way, how does one make sure that one has the proper, selfless, humble attitude toward Torah study so that it will be a life-giving medicine? Through studying Panemius of Torah. Say this, the spiritual mystical teachings that are about abstract concepts that we can never fully, properly, completely understand. So it kind of puts us in our place and it humbles us, it makes us refined. And then even when we're doing fun things like going down the Parshah rabbit hole, it's healing us, it's giving us life. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you for your wonderful viewers who are all spiritually refined to continue going down the Parshah rabbit hole with you reverently and respectfully. And may everything that you find in the Parshah rabbit hole be an elixir of life.
Thank you, Chase. And now we can continue on to magic potions and herbology. When I started digging deeper into the magical qualities of the mandrakes, it led me to Shar HaGilgulim by Chaim Vital, which explains the Kabbalistic teachings of his teacher, the Arizal. Right in the middle of some Kabbalistic explanations of Chumash, it veers off into a list of special plants and their properties. It says these are a few of the plants that my teacher taught me about, and he says that I'm not going to go into detail, but here it is generally. Now, some of you might have heard Kabbalah and magic plants and thought, okay, that makes sense, but it's really uncharacteristic. Kabbalah doesn't do that. I remember a few years ago, my brother and I were trying to find some sources about alchemy in Torah, and we couldn't find anything.
For centuries, alchemists have labored in vain trying to turn lead into gold.
So this is an unusual and uncharacteristic trait. Now, most of the plants mentioned here are described as having pretty normal medicinal effects. For example, there's a plant that's described as having very large leaves and a giant tube-like stalk that grows up from between the leaves. It's more than 2 feet tall, and some sort of fuzzy stuff grows inside of it. And he says that the juice of this plant can be used to help somebody with urinary problems who is urinating too often. If anybody out there knows what this plant is, please let me know in the comments. For no particular reason, just a friend wants to know. There's a lot of plants in this list that help with eye problems, but the most interesting one is the mandrakes. And here's how he describes it. He says that the fruit of the mandrake is called tapuchim shaitim, fool's apples, or insanity apples. And he says that this plant derives its power from the lahat ha'cherev ha'mesapeches, the flame of the spinning sword. So in Bereshit it says that when Adam and Chava were kicked out of Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, the entrance to Gan Eden was protected by fool's apples, or insanity apples. And he says that this plant derives its power from the lahat ha'cherev ha'mesapeches, the flame of the spinning sword. So in Bereshit it says that when Adam and Chava were kicked out of Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, the entrance to Gan Eden was protected by this spinning fire sword. And it shouldn't surprise you that the spinning fire sword has some sort of Kabbalistic implications. I don't know what they are. If anybody does, please put it in the comments. But apparently mandrakes are connected to it. And he says that's why their fruit is called tapuchim shaitim. Shtus, which means foolishness or insanity, is also related to the word for bending or leaning, which I assume is why we're connecting this to the spinning sword. And he says therefore it causes shtus, insanity or foolishness, connected to it. And he says that's why their fruit is called tapuchim shaitim. Shtus, which means foolishness or insanity, is also related to the word for bending or leaning, which I assume is why we're connecting this to the spinning sword. And he says therefore it causes shtus, insanity or foolishness to the person who eats them. Now I'd like to point out here that mandrakes are actually part of the nightshade family, and they are poisonous, they are toxic. And part of their toxicity is that they have a hallucinogenic effect. And I'm assuming that's what he's referring to here. But it doesn't end there. He goes on and explains that this is how you can use it. If you take these fruits and you wrap them in deerskin and then hang them around your neck, They can be used to save you from a sword attack, because the person who attacks you, their sword will get flipped on them and it'll kill the attacker. And then he adds at the end that if you take the skins of the fruit and dry them and grind them, you can make some sort of medicinal eyeshadow. So this led me to thinking about poisons, and so I searched for fruit and dry them and grind them, you can make some sort of medicinal eyeshadow. So this led me to thinking about poisons, and so I searched for Sam HaMavis, an elixir of death. And this is what I found in Sefer Chassidim. Yehuda HaChassid in Sefer Chassidim gives some advice for somebody who finds himself in a situation where they fear that they might be poisoned. He says this is what you should do. Craft a knife from snake bone, and then take that knife and stick it into stuff, bread or a table, anything you think might be poisoned. And he explains that since snakes are full of venom, their bones can absorb the poison that's made from snake venom. So when you stick the knife into the bread, it will absorb the poison. And he says if you stick the knife into a table and there's poison there, even if that poison wasn't actually made from snake venom, the two similar substances will still attract each other, and the snake bone will attract the poison and remove it.
Trust in me.
Now, the most interesting thing I found about magic plants was from Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed by Rambam, Maimonides. But the thing is, Rambam doesn't believe in any of it. He uses it all as an example of ancient pagan absurdity. And he mentioned a specific book called On Nabatean Agriculture, and he used it as an example of particularly ridiculous things that he says are complete nonsense. But it's fun, so we'll go through one of them here. He says, according to this book of ancient pagan nonsense, there was once a tree that they used for prophecy, that somebody would go to and get prophecy from this tree, an Asherah tree. And the tree was having an argument with some mandrakes.
Excuse me, are you the singing bush?
Because the mandrake plant wanted to take its place. And I don't think it just means it wanted to take its physical place. I think it wanted to take its place in terms of being a magical guide to the people. And so when we think it's for prophecy, that somebody would go to and get prophecy from this tree, an Asherah tree, and the nonsense, there was once a tree that they used for prophecy, that somebody would go to and get prophecy from this tree, an Asherah tree. And the tree was having an argument with some mandrakes.
Excuse me, are you the singing bush?
Because the mandrake plant wanted to take its place. And I don't think it just means it wanted to take its physical place. I think it wanted to take its place in terms of being a magical guide to the people. And so when the magician came to get advice from the tree wouldn't give it to him. And he said, hey, I'm busy with this whole fight with this mandrake. And the tree said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go ask all the magicians which is better for magic, me or the mandrake. And then Rambam doesn't finish the story. And he says, if it wasn't for monotheism becoming so prominent in the world, our days would be much darker than they are now. Which is saying a lot, because Jews were dealing with a lot of persecution, as we have throughout time. But apparently it would be even worse if everybody believed in magical trees.
What do you think you're doing?
Now, Rambam does something that I think is amazing here. He uses something that he thinks is completely irrational to take things in Torah that seem irrational and make them rational. I'll tell you what I mean. Rambam goes through a bunch of chukim, mitzvahs that don't make sense, like not mixing wool and linen and not grafting plants. And he explains that the reason why we do all of those things is because each one of those mitzvahs corresponds directly to some sort of ancient pagan ritual. And that's why we can't do it. And he goes through and uses this book to mention specific rituals and show how different mitzvahs that we have correspond to those specific rituals. So the Rambam takes things that he thinks are nonsense and uses them to take things in Torah that could be perceived as nonsense and make them make complete sense, which I think is really neat. So we know that magic doesn't have a prominent place in Torah. Even if we can find examples of magical things, it's not how we do stuff. We know that we're forbidden to practice magic, whether it works or not. But there's also a lot of stuff that's kind of gray area magic that might be allowed, and even that we're not that into. And I wanted to try to find a reason for why we're not into those types of things from somebody who actually believed that such things were possible. And so the last thing I'm going to share with you is another piece from Sefer Chassidim. It asks this question: why didn't Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, put all of his wisdom into books instead of just the 3 that we have? King Solomon was the wisest person ever, and he knew everything. Why didn't he write it all down for us? And Sefer Chassidim answers that it would lead to bittul Torah, neglecting Torah and mitzvahs. And then he gives some specific examples of the type of chachma that we're talking about. He says there's a type of chachma, type of knowledge, that would allow you to be able to look at an animal, and without slaughtering it, you'd be able to tell if it has some sort of otherwise undetectable internal injury that would render it non-kosher. And also he says there's a type of chachma that would allow you to look at various pieces of meat that are all mixed together and tell which ones are kosher and which ones are non-kosher. And he says this knowledge wasn't transmitted to us because if it was, we would rely on it. Now, what I think is so cool about this is that the end goal is the same. He's talking about a situation where we're using the magic to figure out if meat is kosher or not. So in the end, we're eating kosher meat, right? The problem is the process. So what I think Sefer Chassidim is telling us here is that one of the greatest things about Torah is the process, not just the punchline, is it kosher or not? It's about following the winding path through Torah to get there, which is very rabbit hole. And speaking of the rabbit hole, that's it. We got to the end of this one. As always, if you have any questions or ideas that send me down more rabbit holes, please put them in the comments. Thank you for following me down the rabbit hole. If you find any magical plants down here, don't touch them. I don't know what they do.
I think that was my favorite episode that he's done, truthfully. Let's see. All right. One moment. Also, I do want to show what I've been doing. I would have started the stream probably a bit earlier, but I have been collecting olives. And for those of you who don't know, olives aren't actually edible straight away. So I've been, well, it is just since yesterday, I think, yeah. But I've been like salting them to draw out moisture. Oh, wow. But yeah, so these should be ready in like, I think it's about a month or so, which will be just in time for, oh wow, just in time for Hanukkah. Perfect. Perfect. I'm really excited for this. So anyway, here, we'll start with this. Baruchu et Adonai Hamvorach, Baruch Adonai Hamvorach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, ונתן לנו את תורתו, ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה. All right.
ויצא יעקב מבאר-שבע וילך חרנה ויפגע במקום וילן שם כיבה השמש ויפתח מאבני המקום וישם את מראת שותהו וישכב במקום ההוא ויחלום והנה סולם מוצב עשה וראשו מגיע השמיימה והנה מלאכי אלוהים עולים ויורדים בו והנה אדוני נסב עליו ויאמר אני אדוני אלוהי אברהם אביך ואלוהי יצחק הארץ אשר אתה שוכב עליה לך אתננה ולזרעך והיה זרעך כעפר הארץ ופרסת ימה וקדמה וצפונה ונגבה ונברכו בך כל משפחות האדמה וזרעך והנה אנוכי עמך ושמתיך בכל אשר תלך ואשיב אותך אל האדמה הזאת כי לא אעזבך וזרעך וקדמה וצפונה ונגבה והיה זרעך כעפר הארץ ופרסת ימה וקדמה וצפונה ונגבה ונברכו בך כל משפחות האדמה וזרעך והנה אנוכי עמך ושמתיך בכל אשר תלך ואשיב אותך אל האדמה הזאת כי לא אעזבך עד אשר אם עשיתי את אשר דיברתי לך ויבס יעקב משנתו ויאמר אכן יש אדוני במקום הזה ואנוכי לא ידעתי וירא ויאמר من נורא המקום הזה אין זה כי אם בית אלוהים וזה שער השמיים וישכם יעקב בבוקר ויקח את האבן אשר שם את מרעשותיו וישם אותה מצבה ויסוק שמן על ראשה ויקרא את שם המקום ההוא בית אל ואולם לוז שם העיר לראשונה וידר יעקב נדר ואולם לוז שם על ראשה ויקרא את שם המקום ההוא בית אל ואולם לוז שם העיר לראשונה וידר יעקב ההוא בית אל ואולם לוז שם העיר ויקרא את שם המקום ההוא בית אל ואולם לוז שם העיר לראשונה וידר יעקב נדר לאמור אם יהיה אלוהים עמדי ושמרני בדרך הזה אשר אנוכי הולך ונתן לי לחם.
So I just want to make a note. The city of Luz, there's some deep Kabbalistic connections there, but we'll cover it later if we have time.
לאכול וברד ללבוש ושבתי בשלום אל בית אבי והיה אדוני לי לאלוהים והאבן הזאת אשר שמתי מצבה יהיה בית אלוהים וכל אשר תיתן לי אעשרנו לך וישא יעקב רגלו וילך ארצה ונקדם ויח וישא יעקב אעשרנו לך וישא יעקב רגלו וילך ארצה ונקדם וירא והנה באר בשדה והנה שם שלושה עדרי צאן רובצים עליה כי מן הבאר ההיא ישבו העדרים והאבן גדולה על פי הבאר ונאספו שמה כל העדרים וגללו את האבן מעל פי הבאר והשקו את הצאן והשיבו את האבן על פי הבאר למקומה ויאמר להם יעקב אחי מאין אתם ויאמר ويؤمروا محران نحن ويؤمر لهم حيثعتم إثلبان بن نحور ويؤمروا يدانوا ويؤمر لهم أشلوم له ويؤمروا شلوم وإني راحل بتو بقى عمصون ويؤمر ويؤمروا شلوم نتم ويؤمروا محران نحن ويؤمر لهم حيثعتم إثلبان بن نحور ويؤمروا يدانوا ويؤمر لهم أشلوم له ويؤمروا شلوم وإني راحل بتو بقى عمصون شلوم له ويؤمر شلوم ويؤمر يدانوا ويؤمر لهم أشلوم له يؤمر هنعد يوم جدول لو راحل بتو بقى عمصون ويؤمر له ويؤمر شلوم وإني راحل بتو بقى عمصون ويؤمر هن إثلتم ويؤمروا محران نحن ويؤمر لهم حيثعتم إثلبان بن نحور ويؤمروا يدانوا ويؤمر لهم أشلوم له ويؤمر شلوم وإني راحل بتو بقى عمصون ويؤمر هنعد يوم وإني راحل بتو بقى عمصون ويؤمر له ويؤمر شلوم وإني راحل بتو بقى عمصون ويؤمر هنعد يوم جدول لعيف هي أسيف مكني أشقوها الصون والخور يعوب ويؤمروا لو نخل عاد أشير يأسف كلها عذريم ويغاللوا إثا إذن معاد فيها بير ويشخين الصون عذنوا مذبير عمان ورحيل باء عم الصون أشير لأبيها كي رعاه هي وهي كأشير رأى يعقوب إسرائيل بس لبن أحي إمو وإفصون لبن أحي إمو ويقاش يعقوب ويغيل إثا إذن معاد فيها بير وياش إفصون لبن أحي إمو ويشاق يعقوب لرحيل ويساء إثقلو ويجيب يعقوب لرحيل كي أحي أبيها هو ويخيب رقاه والتارس والتجد لأبيها ويخشموع لبان إتشيما يعقوب بن أحوثو وياروس لقاته ويحبك له وينشق له ويبيئه البنثو ويسفر للبان إتقل الدبرين هائلي ويؤمر له لبان عصمي مبصري أتى ويشف عمو حوضيش يمين ويؤمر لبن ليعقوب أخي أتى وعبدتاني حنام أكيد لي من مسكوتيخا وللبان شتفانوس شيم أكيد لأ وشيم أكيطنا رحيل وعيني لأ ركوث ورحيل هايثا يفتو ويفات مرئي ويهاب يعقوب إطرحيل ويفات مرئيل وعيني لأ ركوث ورحيل هايثا يفتو ويفات مرئي ويهاب يعقوب إسرائيل ويؤمر عبثة 7 سنين برحيل باتخاذ حقيقنا ويؤمر لبان طوب تتيق سهلة بتتيق سهل شاحر 7 عمدي يعقوب برحيل 7 سنين ويهيو فعنو كيمين أحدين بآهبثو أثاه ويؤمر يعقوب إلبن هافا إتشتي كيما لأو يمي وأبو إليها ويأسوف لبان إثقل أنشي همكم ويا عاصم شتي ويفعرف ويقع مثل آبتو ويفيق ثاه يمي وأبو إليها ويأسوف لبان إثقل أنشي همكم ويا عاصم شتي ويفعرف ويقع مثل آبتو ويفيق ثاه إلو ويبو إليها ويتين لبن لا إتزل با شفحاثو للآبتو شفحا ويفبوكر وهنهي لأ ويومر اللبان مزوث عسيثا لي ألو برحل عبادتي عماخ ولما المثاني ويومر لبان لو يعسيخين يقومينو لفيت الصعيرات لفنيها بخيرات ملي شفو عزوث وينتنا لخان قمت زوث بعبودا أشير تعبود عمدي عود 7 سنين أحيروث ويا عاس يعقوب كي أشير تعبود عمدي عود 7 سنين أحيروث ويا
I don't know why they're translating Shavua Zot here as week. It's not referring to a week, it's referring to a week of years. It's referring to 7 years. Work another 7 years and I'll give you Rachel. Wow. Wow, that's tough. Puts into perspective. He really loved her that long and worked all that time just to get the right to marry her.
בעבודה אשר תעבוד עמדי עוד 7 שנים אחרות ויעש יעקב כן וימלא שבועה זאת וייתן לו את רחל ביתו לא לאישה וייתן לבן לרחל ביתו את בלהה שפחתו לה לשפחה ויבוא גם אל רחל ויאהב גם את רחל מלאה ויעבוד עמו עוד 7 שנים אחרות וירא אדוני כי שנואה לאה ויפתח את רחמת ורחל עטרה ותר לאה ותלד בן ותתרשמו לבן מה זאת עשית לי הלא ברחל עבדתי עמך ולמה רמיתני עוד 7 שנים אחרות וירא אדוני כי שנואה לאה ויפתח את רחמת שפחה ויבוא גם אל רחל ויאהב גם את רחל מלאה ויעבוד עמו עוד 7 שנים אחרות וירא אדוני כי שנואה לאה ויפתח את רחמת ורחל עטרה ותר לאה ותלד בן ותתרשמו ראובן כי אמרה כי ראה אדוני בעוני כי עתה יאהבני אישי ותר עוד ותלד בן ותאמר כי שמע אדוני כי שנואה אנוכי וייתן לי גם את זה ותתרשמו שמעון ותרעוד ותלד בן ותאמר עמו בן ותתרשמו ראובן כי אמרה כי ראה אדוני בעוני כי עתה יאהבני אישי ותרעוד ותלד בן ותאמר כי שמע אדוני כי שנואה אנוכי וייתן לי גם את זה ותתרשמו שמעון ותרעוד ותלד בן ותאמר עתה הפעם ילווה אישי אלי כי ילדתי לו 3 בנים על כן קרא שמו לוי ותרעוד ותלד בן ותאמר הפעם עובד את אדוני על כן קרא שמו יהודה ותעמוד מלדת ותרא רחל כי לא ילדה ליעקב ותקנא רחל באחותה ותאמר אל יעקב הבה לי בנים ואם אין מצא אנוכי ויחרף יעקב ברחל הבה לי בנים ואם אין מצא אנוכי אחותה ותאמר אל יעקב הבה לי בנים ואם אין מצא אנוכי ויחרף יעקב ברחל ויאמר התחת אלוהים אנוכי אשר מנע ממך בריבתן ותאמר הנה אמתי בלהה בוא אליה ותלד על ברכי ואת בנך אנוכי ממנה ותיתן לו את בלהה שפחתה
I don't know if I ever saw this parallel before, but this is very similar to the whole story with Sarah and Hagar. This is like, I don't know how I never saw this parallel before. Maybe I did and I just never remembered it. I don't know.
ويبוא إليها يعقوب وتعر بها وتلد ليعقوب بن وتؤمر رحل دنني إلهيم وغم جمع بقولي ويتن لي بن على كين قارئ شمو دان وتهر عود وتلد بها شفعة رحل بن شني ليعقوب وتؤمر رحل نفتولد إلهيم نفتالتي عما حوثي يوم يخلتي وتتراشمو نفتالي وتيري لأكي عامثا من ليذت وتقع إثز الباشحة وتتين أثا ليعقوب لإشاء وتلد زلبا نفتالي بلها شفعة رحل بن شني ليعقوب وتؤمر رحل نفتولد إلهيم
Interesting. So it's saying Naftule Elohim, the schemes of God, or the devices, the decisions of God, the plans of God. Niftalti, I have planned or maneuvered the schemes of God. I have maneuvered with my sister. What does that imply? I wonder. There's let's see. I guess I could find that easy. Okay. Oh wow, I pulled up right to this. Okay, so what's it say? Here it translates Elohim as faithful. I've struggled mightily with my sister. First, she had been judged by the attribute of justice of God as a result of realizing her error. She has now become closer to her sister. This is reflected in history through Bezalel from the tribe of Yehuda, son of Leah, became the primary architect of the tabernacle in the desert. His second in command was Aholiab from the tribe of Dan, i.e. from Rachel's servant maid. She felt that in a measure she had also prevailed over her sister in a rivalry, as the permanent temple in Solomon's time would be constructed by a descendant of Naphtali from her family. King Solomon sent for Hiram and brought him down from Tyre. He was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father had been a Tyrian, a coppersmith. He was endowed with skill, ability, and talent for executing all work on bronze. He came to King Solomon and executed all his work. I've wrestled mightily with my sister. Rachel meant that she had managed to put up with a great deal of pain in her. Okay, so it's not having. I'm trying to see if I can find anything particularly interesting. Rabbit hole-y. Let's see. Here in John interprets as difficult. The use of the term Elohim is symbolic of the fierceness of the sisters' competition. Vayetze is Rabbi David Kimchi. When we want to emphasize something as being extraordinary, we sometimes use the word Elohim to do this. For instance, in the description of the size of the city of Nineveh in Jonah 3:3, where it is stated as Ir Gedolah Elohim. That doesn't make sense though, because it's not Ir Gedolah Elohim. Anyway, a similar expression in Psalms 36:7, Keharare El, describes towering mountains by using the word Elohim as the appropriate adjective to describe this. Psalms 80:11. Okay. Wrestlings of God. Okay. Menachem ben Seruk explains in his Machberet dictionary that the word Naphtali is from the same root as Patil in Numbers 19:15. Covering Patil. What is that? Patil. That's like Klipa almost. By bonds from God have I been joined to my sister, made equal to her to merit the privilege of having children. I, however, explain in this same sense as perverse and crooked. I have been persistent and have been made. Okay, I don't know. And I've prevailed. Naphtali. I have arrived repeatedly in prayer before God. This is interesting. A prophetic pronouncement. I have become closer to God through him, Naphtali, as Hiram of the tribe of Naphtali did for the construction. Okay, it's the same thing as before.
نفتالتي عين أحوثي يوم يخلتي واتقرا شمو نفتالي وتيري لأ كي عامثا من ليذت واتقع اثزلبا شفحثا وتتين أثا ليعقوب لإشاع وتيلت زلبا شفحث لأ ليعقوب ذين وتومر لأ باغد وتترا اثشمو قاد وتيلت زلبا شفحث لأ بين شني ليعقوب وتومر لأ بأشري كي شيروني بنوث واتقرا اثشمو أشير ويلخ رؤوكين بما قصير الطيب ويمصاد ذئيم بسده ويذي أثام اللي أمو وتومر رحل اللي تنين علي بدو ذئي بنيخ وتومر لا هم عتقتك إشي ولا قاحت قام إثدو ذئي بني وتومر رحل لخن إشكا عمخ الليلة تاحت دو ذئي بنيخ ويبو يعقوب من هالسده بعيرب وتيصي لآخر ويمصاد ذئيم بسده ليعقوب وتومر لآ بأشري كي إشيروني بنوث واتقرا إثشمو أشير ويلخ رؤوكين بما قصير الطيب ويمصاد ذئيم بسده ويذي أثام اللي أمو وتومر رحل اللي تنين علي بدو ذئي بنيخ وتومر لا هم عتقتك إشي ولا قاحت قام إثدو ذئي بني وتومر رحل لخن إشكا عمخ الليلة تاحت دو ذئي بنيخ ويبو يعقوب من هالسده بعيرب وتيصي لقاثو وتومر إلي تبو كي سخور سخبتيخا بذو ذئي بني ويشكا عمخ الليلة ويشمع إلهيم اللي وتار وتلد ليعقوب بين حميشي وتومر لآ نثان إلهيم سخري أشر نثاتي شفحتي لإشي אחי ותקרא שמו יששכר ותרעו לאה ותלת בן שישי ליעקב ותאמר לאה זה בדני אלוהים אותי זה וטוב הפעם יזבלני אישי כי ילדתי לו 6 בנים ותקרא את שמו זבולון ויער ילד כי ילדתי לו אותי זה וטוב הפעם יזבלני אישי כי ילדתי לו 6 בנים ותקרא את שמו זבולון ויער ילד הבת ותקרא את שמה דינה ויזמור אלוהים את רחל וישמע אליה אלוהים ויפתח את רחמה ותהר ותלד בן ותאמר אסף אלוהים את חרפתי ותקרא את שמו יוסף לאמור יוסף אדוני לי בן אחר ויהי כאשר ילד רחל את יוסף ויאמר יעקב אל לבן שלחני ואליך אל מקומי ולעשי תנה את נשי ואת ילדי אשר עבדתי אותך בהן ואליך כי אתה ידעת את עבודתי אשר עבדתיך ויאמר אליו לבן אמנה מצאתי חן בעיניך ניחשתי ויברכני אדוני בגללך ויאמר נקבה שכרך עלי ואתנה ויאמר אליו אתה ידעת את אשר עבדתיך ואת אשר היה מקנך איתי כי מעט אשר היה לך לפני ויפרוס לרוב ויברך אדוני אופך לרגלי ועתה מתי אעשה גם אנוכי לבתי ויאמר מה אתן לך ויאמר יעקב לא תיתן לי מאומה אם תעשה לי הדבר הזה אשובה אראה צאנך אשמור אעבור בכל צאנך היום הסר משם אעשה גם אנוכי לבתי ויאמר מה אתן לך ויאמר יעקב לא תיתן לי מאומה אם תעשה לי הדבר הזה אשובה אראה צאנך אשמור אעבור בכל צאנך היום הסר משם כל זה נפות ותלו וכל סחם בכסבים ותלו ונפות בעזים והיה שכרי וענית בי סרטתי ביום מחר כי תבוא על שכרי לפניך כל אשר איננו נפות ותלו בעזים בכסבים גנובו איתי ויאמר לבן הן לו יהי כדבריך ויעשה ביום ההוא את התיישים העקודים והטלויים ואת כל העזים הנקודות והטלויות כל אשר לבן בו וכל הום בכסבים וייתן ביד בניו.
It's kind of interesting because Laban has the white sheep. It's implied because if they have brownish or like speckled, then it's Jacob's. So it's almost like the opposite of Laban, the opposite of white.
وياسم ديرك شلوشة يمين بينه وبين يعقوب ويعقوب رؤي الصون لبان النوثروث ويقحلو يعقوب مقال الاثنين لاح ويروز وعرمون ويفصل بين بصالوث لبنوث محسوف اللبان أشير على مقلوث ويصير مقلوث أشير بصيل باري عطين بشيقة ثمايم أشير تابونا الصون لشلوث لنوغا حصون ويحامنا لبوان لشلوث.
I'm pretty sure that Luz is almond. Or maybe they translate it differently so that they can have shaked be almond when I think that shaked could arguably be more than just that. But.
ويحموها صون المقروث وتلاتنا صون عقودين نقودين مطلوبين وهكي سبين تفريد يعقوب ويتين أشر لبن بو بكل هموم بكسبين ويتين بيد بناو وياسم ديرك شلوشة يمين بينه وبين يعقوب ويعقوب رؤي الصون لبن النوثروث ويقحلو يعقوب مقال الاثنين لاح ويروز وعرمون ويفصل بين بصالوث لبنوث محسوف اللبن أشير على مقروث ويصير مقروث أشير بصيل باري عطين بشيقة ثمايم أشير تابونا الصون لشتوت لنوغا حصون ويحامنا ببوان لشتوت ويحموها صون المقروث وتلاتنا صون عقودين نقودين مطلوبين وهكي سبين يفريد يعقوب ويتين بيني الصون العقود ويقولون بصون لبن وياشيت له عذري لبدو ويلو شثام على صون لبن بصون لبن وياشيت بين حصون العبود ويخلهم بصون لبن وياشد له عذري لبدو ويلو شثام عن صون لبن وهيا بخل يحين حصون هم كشروت ويسم يعقوب إثم مقلوث لعيني حصون باري حطيم ليحمين بمقلوث وها عطيف حصون لو يسيم وهيا عطوفين للبن ويحقي شويم ليعقوب ويفروس هايش مهود ويلو صون ربوث مشفعوث وعبديم وغمليم وحموريم ويشمع تدبري بين لبن لمور لقاع يعقوب كل أشير لأبينو وما أشير لأبينو عسى كل هكبو هزي ويار يعقوب بين لبن وإنه عمو كيف مول شلشوم ويو ويصي يعقوب من بيرشبع ويلخ حران ويفقع بما مثاي لي ويتين بيضناو ويا الصنع ويصير مخلوق مشفعوث وعبدين ومليهم ويفروس هايش مهود ويلو صون ربوث مشفعوث وعبدين ومليم وحموريم ويشمع تدبري بين لبن لمور لقاع يعقوب كل أشير لأبينو وما أشير لأبينو عسى كل هكبو هزي ويار يعقوب بين لبن وإنه عمو كيف مول شلشوم ويومير أدوني اليعقوب شوف الإيريس أبو ثيخة والمولد تيخة شلشوم ويومير أدوني اليعقوب شوف الإيريس أبو ثيخة والمولد تيخة وإيه عمار ويشلح يعقوب ويقرأ لرحيل ولليها حسادي الصنو ويومير لهين رؤي أنوخي إثبني أبيخين كيننو إلاي كيف مول شلشوم ويلوهي أبي هيا عمادي ويهتينا يدعتين كي بخل روحي عبادتي أبيخين وأبيخين إثلبي وهي حليفة مسكوتي عسير إثمونيم ولو نثنو إلهيم لهرا عمادي إنكو يومات نقدم يهي سفريخا ويالدو خلصون نقدم وإنكو يومات عقدم يهي سفريخا ويالدو خلصون عقدم ويصيل إلهيم إثمني أبيخين ويتنلي ويهي بعث يحيم حصون وإساعيني وإيري بحالون وهي بعث يحيم حصون وإساعيني وإيري بحالون وهي بعث يحيم حصون وإساعيني وإيري بحالون وإني أعدودين أعوليم حصون عقديم نقديم وبرديم ويوم إلهي ملأخ إلهيم بحالون يعقوب وأمار إنني ويوم سنة عيني خاوري كلها عدودين أعوليم حصون إنني يحيم حصون وإساعيني وإيري بحالون وإني أعدودين أعوليم حصون عقديم نقديم وبرديم ويوم إلهي ملأخ إلهيم بحالون يعقوب وأمار إنني ويوم سنة عيني خاوري كلها عدودين أعوليم حصون عقديم نقديم وبرديم كي رئيفي كل أشير لبان عوسي لخ أنوخي هائل بيثيل أشير مشاق تاشم مصيبة أشير نذاب تلي شام نذير حتى ومصيب من هاريس الزوت وشوف الإيريس مولد تيخا وتعان رحل ولقاء وتمارنا له أعود لانو حلق ونحلا ببيت أبينو هلو نخريوث نحشاب نولو كي مخرانو ويخال جم أخول إفكسبينو كي خل عوشر أشير تصيل إلوهم ما أبينو لانوه والبنينو وعتا كل أشير إلوهم ما أبينو لانوه والبنينو وعتا كي خل عوشر أشير تصيل إلوهم ما أبينو لانوه والبنينو وعتا كي خل عوشر أشير تصيل إلوهم ما أبينو لانوه والبنينو وعتا كل أشير أمر إلهيم إليخ عسي ويقوم يعقوب ويسى إذبنا وإثناشا على جمالين وينهار كل مقنين ويدخل يخوشو أشير رخاش مقنين إنيانو أشير رخاش بفدان أرام لفو إليسحاق أبي أصار كنان ولبان هلاخ لغزوز إتصونو وتغنو رحيل إثترافيم أشير لأبيها ويغنو يعقوب إثليب لبان هارمي عالبلي يجيد له كي بوريح ويبراحو ويخول أشير له ويقوم ويعبور إثم نهر وياسم إثبنا هار الجلعاد ويقاد للبان بيوم الشريشي كي براه يعقوب ويقام إثنحو عمو ويردوف حران ديرخ شيعات يمين ويذبح أثو بهار الجلعاد ويبو إلهيم اللبان هارمي بحلوم الليلة ويومر له تشامر لخا بنت دبر عن يعقوب متبوب عذراء ويسير لبان إث يعقوب ويعقوب تقع إفاه لقبا ولبان تقع إثنحو بهار الجلعاد ويومر لبن ليعقوب ما عسيتا وتغنو إث لفافي وتنهر إذ بنو ثاي كيشبويوث حارب لما نحبيث لفروع وتغنو أوثي ولو إن قادت لفويوث حارب لما نحبيث لفروع وتغنو أوثي ولو إن قادت لي وأشل حخا بسمحة وشيرين بثوف النور ولو نطشتاني لنشيخ لفناي ولبنو ثاي عدا إسكال تعصو يشلي يدي لا عصو فيما خيمرا ولو أفي خيم إمش أمار إلهي لمور الشامر لخا مدبر عن يعقوب مطور عذراء وعدت هلو خلقت كي نخسوف نخسفت لبيت أبيخا لما غنفت إثلو هاي ويان يعقوب ويومر للبن كي يريثي كي أماتي انت غزول إذ بنو فيخا معمي عيم انت غزول إذ بنو فيخا معمي عيم أشر تمصى إثلو هيخا لو عيم أشر تمصى إثلو هيخا لو يحيى نغير أحينو أكل لخا ما عمدي وتحلق ويضع يعقوب كي رحيل ينفاثم ويبو
Wait, why is it saying that? Okay, this doesn't make sense. But why did you steal my gods? And Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid that it was because I was afraid that I said, lest you steal your daughters from me. With that doesn't. Maybe he's saying that's why I left, but then he's saying, let's see, with whoever you find your gods, they will not live they will not live against or like in the presence of our clan, basically our kin. Okay. That I don't remember it being just like from one to the other.
لفان بأوهل يعقوب وبأوهل لآ وبأوهل شتيها أمهوث والأمصى ويصرف بأوهل لآ ويفوه بأوهل رحيل ورحيل لاقحا إذ الترفين والتسيمين بخار الجمال والتشيخ عليهم ويمشيش لفان إذ كلها أوهل والأمصى وتومر الأبيها علي حرب عيني.
I do also wonder if there's a context where that's understood to be referring to why she's not buried with them. Because there's this idea that you're still living even when you're dead, just, different type. So here, let me check this out. All right, let's see. He shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen. Let's see. Yeah, I can't find anything that would have been like what I was looking for.
أدوني كي لو أخل لقوم مبانيخ كي ديرخ نشيم لي ويحبس ولو مصا إذا الترفين ويحار ليعقوب ويارب بلبن ويان يعقوب ويومر ותאמר אל אביה אלי חר בעיני אדוני כי לא אוכל לקום מפניך כי דרך נשים לי ויחפש ולא מצא את הטרפים וייחר ליעקב וירב בלבן ויחפש כי לא אוכל מצא ותאמר אל אביה אלי חר בעיני אדוני כי לא אוכל לקום מפניך כי דרך נשים לי ויחפש ולא מצא את הטרפים וייחר ליעקב וירב בלבן ויען יעקב ויאמר ללבן מה פשעי מה חטאתי כי דלת אחריי כי מששת את כל כלי המסעת מכל כלי ביתך שים כה נגד אחי ואחיך ויוכיחו בין שנינו זה 20 שנה אנוכי עמך וחיליך ועזיך לא שכלו ואלי שונאיך לא אכלתי טרפה לא הבאתי אליך אנוכי אחתרנה בידי תבקשנה גנובתי.
Notice this. 20 years I've been with you, rachlecha, and your ewes, your she-sheep. Notice that rachlecha, same as Rachel. That's what Rachel means.
וגנובתי לילה הייתי ביום אכלני חורף ופרח בלילה ותדעת שנתי מעיניי זה לי 20 שנה בביתך עבדתיך 14 שנה בשתי בנותיך ו6 שנים בשונאיך ותחלף את משכותי 10 מונים לולא אלוהי אבי אלוהי אברהם ופחד יצחק היה לי כי עתה רחם שלחתני אפעני ואת יריעת כפי ראה אלוהים ויוכח אמש פי ראה אלוהים אפעני ואת יריעת כפי ראה אלוהים אלוהי אברהם ופחד יצחק היה לי כי עתה רחם שלחתני אפעני ופחד יצחק היה לי כי עתה רחם שלחתני אפעני ואת יריעת כפי ראה אלוהים ויוכח אמש ויען לבן ויאמר אל יעקב הבנות בנותיי והבנים בניי והצאן צאני וכל אשר אתה רואה לי הוא ולבנותיי מה אעשה לאלה היום או לבניהן אשר ילדו ועתה לך נכרתה ברית אני ואתה והיה לעד ביני וביניך ויקח יעקב הבן וירימה משרפה ויאמר יעקב לאחיו יקנו אבנים ויקנו אבנים ויעשו גל ויאכלו שם على الجال يكنوا أبنين ويعصوا غال ويأكلوا شام على الجال ويقالوا لبان يغار ساهتوثا ويعقوب ترى له جلعيد ويؤمر لبان الجال ويعصوا غال ويأكلوا شام على الجال ويقالوا لبان يغار ساهتوثا ويعقوب ترى له جلعيد أبنين ويقنوا أبنين ويعصوا غال ويأكلوا شام على الجال ويقالوا لبان يغار ساهتوثا ويعقوب ترى له جلعيد ويؤمر לבן הגל הזה עד ביני ובינך היום על כן קרא שמו גלעד והמצווה אשר אמר ישרף אדוני ביני ובינך כן עד ויאמר לבן הגל הזה עד ביני ובינך היום על כן קרא שמו גלעד והמצווה אשר אמר ישרף אדוני ביני ובינך כי נסתר איש מרעהו אם תענה את בנותיי ואם תקח נשים על בנותיי אין איש עמנו ראה אלוהים עד ביני ובינך ויאמר לבן ליעקב הנה הגל הזה והנה המשרפה אשר יריתי ביני ובינך עד הגל הזה ועתה המשרפה אם אני לא אעבור אליך עד הגל הזה ועתה המשרפה אם אני לא אעבור אליך את הגל הזה ועתה המשרפה אם אני לא אעבור אליך את הגל הזה ואם ועתה המסריבה אם אני לא אעבור אליך את הגל הזה ואם אתה לא תעבור אליי את הגל הזה ואת המסריבה הזאת לרעה אלוהי אברהם ואלוהי נחור ישפטו בינינו אלוהי אביהם וישבע יעקב בפח אביהו יצחק ויזבח יעקב זבח בהר ויקרא לאחיו לאכול לחם ויצחק ויזבח יעקב זבח וישבע יעקב בפח אביהו יצחק ויזבח יעקב זבח בהר ויקרא יעקב בפח אביהו יצחק ויזבח יעקב אביהם וישבע יעקב בפח אביהו יצחק ויזבח
Wait, what is this saying? It says this is pretty big. Here, one moment. So it's saying the Elohei Abraham, the God of Abraham, Elohei Nahor. Is it saying it's the same God? I think so, but this is huge. Oh, I saw. They're ancestral deities. The gods of their father. The word for deity in this verse may be understood as sacred. Elohim. Oh, this could be referring to the gods of their father. Let's see. When referring to Yaakov's deity or secular when referring to Laban's deity. Yaakov swore by his father's God. Yaakov was unwilling to refer to his God after Laban had already mentioned his own deities as part of the same reciprocal oath, as he would have considered it as blasphemy. This is why he used a pseudonym, i.e. Pachad, the fear. Oh, the thing that his father feared, which was God, when referring to his father's God. Okay, that's interesting. So it is referring to them as, like, worshipping different gods. Let's see. God of their father. Each one said, the God of our father, judge between us. However, Jacob referred to the God of Abraham, and Laban referred to the God of Nahor, his grandfather, who worshipped idols, as is attested by Joshua. Okay, but who is the God of Nahor? I wonder if it's Yam Nahar. That would be fascinating. Let's see. Your fathers dwelt of old time beyond the river, even Terach, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. Okay. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father. Okay. I'm going to finish this up soon. Just have to get going. The gods of their father. The meaning of this verse may be the respective gods of Terach, the father of both Abraham and Nahor. The first word Elohei is sacred. The second is profane and may therefore be erased. Wait, does it change? Elohei. Wait, Elohei. It's the same word. Elohei. Maybe it's like Elohei versus Ve-Elohei. And sacred. The second is profane and therefore may be erased. Seeing that Nahor had been an idolater, Laban himself also believed in the gods of his grandfather Nahor. No. Oh, yeah. Neither Yitzchak nor Betuel would have been mentioned here, seeing they were well known, famous even. Here too, the word Elohei is profane. Maybe. Okay, wait. Let's see. God of Abraham. Here, the word Elohim is holy. Okay. In the other case, it's referring to idols. God of their father. Here, the name is non-holy. Let's see. Laban meant that Yaakov could not take offense at Laban pairing Nahor's God and Yaakov's God in a single expression. He had chosen Nahor to underline that Nahor's God was also the God of Terach, who is the father of both Abraham and Nahor. He chose someone who was not the son of Terach to make certain it was understood that his oath was only to the God of Yitzchak. Only this God was entitled to judge him. He chose someone who is not the son of Terach. Oh. I don't get it. God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, and also the God of their father shall judge between us. For Laban, the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of Terach are all one and the same. Jacob took an oath, and he would uphold this agreement by the fear of the God of his father Isaac. God of Abraham, okay, blah, 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 blah. Worship each of the part, okay. Yeah, I wish it would have gone into which God, but I can understand why they don't want to mention it.
ويقرأ بهار ويقرأ لهم لإخوة لهم ويوقنوا لهم ويلين بهار ويشكي لبان بوكن ويشيك لغناو ويبنوثاو ويباركهم ويلخ ويشوف لبان ويعقوب يعقوب ويفقعوا بو ملاخي إلهيم ويومر يعقوب كأشير رهان محني إلهيم زي ويقرأ شيم همكو وماهون محنايم.
Interesting. Let's see. Okay, any commentary on this? Camps. 2 camps of angels meeting at this place, the one who had protected him this far. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, dang it. I want to go more into it, but I've got to get going. Okay, now the angels have been fit to join me. There can be no doubt that mine is a godly camp, just as Yaakov had called the place where he had the dream of the ladder Beit El. So he now refer to the camp as Machane Elohim. Okay, interesting. Yeah, we'll move on from here. All right, so here. Baruchu et Adonai Amvorach, Baruch Adonai. Oh wait, no, sorry. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu torat emet v'chayei olam nata betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. All right, and on that note, we will end off here. So here we go. Until next. Oh, by the way, I'm canceling StreamYard now, so I'm gonna have to figure out how to do my other streams from now on. But luckily, I'm all caught up, so I don't really have to worry for a few weeks. But I still am going to try to figure it out. So on that note, until next time, take care, everyone. And here are my olives.
Want to tell the Rebbe the words of the new song that we're singing with Mashiach, right? So I'm just going to read him. Am Yisrael, have no fear. Mashiach will be here this year. We want Mashiach now. We don't want to wait. Okay? Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now. Oh yeah, Am Yisrael, have no fear, Mashiach will be this year. Am Yisrael, have no fear, Mashiach will be here this year. We want Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now, we don't want to wait. We want Mashiach now, Mashiach now, we don't want to wait.